Well, let's go to our panel. In Malmö, Sweden, is former Conservative MEP Sajjad Karim. Andrew Allison joins us from Hull in the UK. He's the head of campaigns for the Freedom Association, a group which says it fights for individual liberty, freedom of expression and national sovereignty. And political analyst Tom Gross joins us from Tel Aviv. He's a former colleague of Boris Johnson. Good to have you all on the program. I'm going to start with the same question for every one of you. Sajjad Karim, is Boris Johnson the person that the country needs right now as Prime Minister?
Well, I certainly, as a Brit, wish him well in his endeavours. The biggest question facing the United Kingdom today is how do we finalise this whole Brexit situation? I hope he has a very detailed plan in hand. This idea of simply being able to bulldoze your way through based purely upon sheer strength of spirit, I'm afraid, is not going to cut the mustard. It will be as successful as a bull in a china shop. What is required here is a very detailed plan and the carrying out of that plan in a very forensic manner, and I wish him well in that endeavour.
OK, you wish him well, but short answer, no. Andrew Allison, is he the man that the country needs?
I think he is the man that the country needs now. I couldn't think of anybody else. I certainly couldn't have supported Jeremy Hunt if I had been a member of the Conservative Party and had a vote. I mean, Jeremy Hunt accused Boris Johnson of peddling optimism. Well, my goodness me, I think we need some optimism now. The whole country is absolutely sick to death of Brexit and really want this over and done with. And I think if anyone's going to do it, then Boris is.
But you can't just motivate yourself out of it, right? I mean, when I'm looking at some of the stuff that he said as well, we need a new spirit of can-do. We're once again going to believe in ourselves and what we can achieve. And like some slumbering giant, we're going to rise and ping off the guy ropes of self-doubt and negativity. It sounds like a speech that a football coach would give an under-15 team, right? I mean, there's nothing about details, nothing about finesse, nothing about what he wants to do.
I think that's a little bit unfair. I mean, it's an under-15 team. But look, we do need a little bit more optimism. Boris is going to have to renegotiate with the European Union. And the European Union is going to have to move a little bit, and we're going to have to move a little bit if we are going to leave on the 31st of October. But I don't believe for one moment that the new European Commission president, or indeed the Council president, is going to want the UK hanging around much longer than the 31st of October, because they want to get on with their jobs.
Tom Gross, is he the right man for the job?
Well, I think we really don't know. I mean, I would agree up to a point with both your previous guests. We certainly need some optimism. There's nothing wrong with optimism. But the first guest who mentioned detail, I'm not sure that's Boris's strongest point. He really has to hit the ground running. We have less than 100 days until his self-imposed deadline, or rather the EU's deadline of October 31st to carry out Brexit, which he says he wants to do by then. We're entering the summer holiday period. Parliament in the UK is about to go into recess, and of course much of the people in France and Germany take the whole of August off. So I've known Boris Johnson since I was a teenager. I don't really believe that politicians change their personalities when they come into power, when they become Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. And although Boris is a celebrity and he's certainly amusing and good television and so on, Britain is at a very, very serious juncture in its modern history. And I just don't know whether Boris has the right temperament for such a serious point in British history.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that people's personalities don't change. Andrew Allison, one of the criticisms of Boris Johnson is similar to the criticisms of Donald Trump, where they say that for everything that Trump says, there's a tweet where he says the opposite in the past. For Boris, it's a column, right? In 2007, when Gordon Brown became Prime Minister, he said, it's the arrogance, it's the contempt. That's what gets me. It's Gordon Brown's apparent belief that he can just trample on the democratic will of the British people. They voted for Tony, and yet they now get Gordon, and a transition about as democratically proper as the transition from Claudius to Nero. It's a scandal. Why are we all conniving in this stitch-up? This is nothing less than a palace coup. So, we had Boris Johnson calling for fresh elections back then. So, he's definitely not going to call for fresh elections now, is he?
Well, there are two issues here. I mean, every time a Prime Minister changes and there isn't a general election, the opposition always calls for a general election. And yes, Boris said that in 2007 about Gordon Brown. And I'm sure that there were Labour politicians back in 2016 who said there should have been a general election immediately after Theresa May took office. But the second point to remember is that we are a parliamentary democracy. We do not elect a Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is appointed by the Queen, and what the Prime Minister has to do is assure the Queen that he or she can command a majority in the House of Commons. And if they can do that, then they get on with the job. And that's an important thing to remember.
I want all of us to have a little listen to Rory Stewart, and then Sajjad, I've got a question for you off the back of it. But let's have a little listen to what Tory frontrunner initially, who then bowed out of the race when he wasn't going to get enough votes, Rory Stewart. Let's have a little listen to what he said about Boris Johnson being potentially dangerous.
I think he's just, I think the danger is the lack of detail, the lack of anything particular. It's the sort of vagueness, the abstraction, the blandness of it that worries me. I literally don't know what happens on the 31st of October or the 1st of November. I can't plot his path. I mean, my mind works by trying to sort of do a little decision tree and think, I don't see how he gets no deals through Parliament. I don't see how he can deliver something that can simultaneously please Amber Rudd and Marc Francois. I don't get it. So, I mean, he's not dangerous in the sense that he's some kind of 1930s figure. It's just that I just don't get him. I mean, he's just not my kind of person. I don't understand how this works.
So, Sajjad Karim, we've had Rory Stewart quit. He doesn't want to work under Boris. We've had Philip Hammond quitting as Chancellor. They're calling them the rebels. Are you more in line with the rebels than you are with Boris Johnson? What would they create as an alternative?
Well, actually, I think what my colleagues have done here is cleared the way so that Boris can get on with forming a team of his own that actually believes that they can deliver this project in the way that Boris, I hope, will be setting out later, or certainly in a short while, to the British people and to our European family for them to see as well. So what they've done is they've cleared the way. He can get on with getting people in who believe what he believes, and that together they can get on with trying to deliver that particular agenda. The one point I will come back to is the requirement for attention to detail. And the one thing about Boris Johnson's past is a very clear demonstration that that has been lacking before. And I sincerely, speaking as a Brit, speaking as a member of the Conservative Party, speaking as somebody who's served as a parliamentarian, a Conservative parliamentarian, and somebody who cares deeply about the unity of the United Kingdom, I sincerely hope that Boris is going to take a very different approach. Not the same carelessness to detail that we've seen from him in previous roles, but actually somebody who adapts to the greatest office that the United Kingdom has for an elected politician.
Andrew Allison, what's his magic plan then? Because we've heard very little about, okay, what are you going to do about the Irish backstop? What are you going to do about the border? What are you going to do about all these myriad issues that are massive right now and will become even bigger on October the 31st. At the moment, we're hearing a lot of motivational talk, as we mentioned earlier. Does he have a plan?
Well, I would imagine that he does have a plan, but, you know, the man hasn't even become Prime Minister yet. He
was
will be
running
in
for
about
Prime
an hour
Minister.
or so's time.
Certainly, but he was running for Prime Minister.
Well, he was running for Prime Minister.
He had an opportunity.
But he's running for Prime.
Yeah, he had an opportunity
Well,
to express his views, right? Yeah.
Well, yes, I do agree with you there. I also agree there with the previous speaker that Boris Johnson, you know, does have to get around the detail a lot more. I mean, his time in as Mayor of London, he had a lot of able deputies around him who used to do a lot of the heavy lifting. He got the credit for it, but it was them that were doing the work. And I really hope that he's got an excellent team around him, and we'll certainly find that out in the next few days. That will be full of details. But I do accept that he has been vague so far. I mean, I think you have to.
So Tom Gross is somebody who's known him for a long, long time. He's an Eton boy, he's an Oxford boy. He's got this mumbly, flabby, sloppy irreverence, which sometimes seems almost carefully crafted, right? And even though he said stuff about Donald Trump in the past, Donald Trump has chimed in. Donald Trump said he's tough and he's smart. They're calling him Britain Trump. That's what he tweeted. And people are saying that's a good thing. They like me over there. So Trump made it about himself. With all of that in mind, tell me about what the symbolism for the UK and its standing, tell me what all of that means and represents with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, knowing the man.
Well, I do think there are some similarities between Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. They both became known on television, in Trump, The Apprentice, in Boris Johnson, Have I Got News for You? And they both are very ambitious, more than policy-oriented. I think he raises the profile of Britain in the sense that people know him by his first name, Boris, not just in Britain, but increasingly internationally. How many politicians in the world are known by their first name? Usually that's just reserved for pop stars like Madonna or Beyonce or something. So in that sense, I think he'll become a well-known, better than, say, Theresa May, a well-known figurehead around the world. But is that good for Britain? I don't know. Donald Trump is a very well-known household name, but it doesn't mean that's necessarily good for America or America's standing. So, look, Boris Johnson is more intelligent than Donald Trump. As you say, he actually got a scholarship to Eton. He did well at Oxford. He was president of the Oxford Union. When I arrived at Oxford, he was older than me, but he was already a celebrity there among students. As the president of the union, he was a celebrity when he was a journalist. We both worked at the Telegraph for a while, and he stood out from practically every other journalist at the Telegraph as a amusing character, a larger-than-life character. He's certainly funny and makes people laugh, but are these the qualities necessary for any prime minister, especially at this juncture in time, which is just critical for Britain? Yesterday he said he wanted to both unite Britain and deliver Brexit. I don't know how that's possible, because the country is very, very divided over Brexit.
Right. Okay, Tom, I thank you very much for joining us from Tel Aviv. Let's say goodbye to Tom and bring in Azeem Ibrahim in Washington, D.C. He was a Labour Party policy advisor and is now a research professor at the Strategic Studies Institute at the U.S. Army War College. Azeem, straight off the bat, Boris Johnson, is he the right man for the job?
Well, the only job that he has to do is deliver Brexit, and for that I believe he's probably the only man for the job. It seems absolutely clear that the team that he's putting together is purely a Brexit team. We've seen lots of resignations so far, even just today. All the Remain members of Parliament and members of the Cabinet are now leaving the stage, and he is composing a team that's going to be composed completely of Leave politicians. And that's actually very important, because the Leavers now have to own this entire show, and if he is not able to deliver Brexit by the 31st of October, or at least have a firm date by the 31st of October when they're actually leaving, then his premiership will be a failure. So he has to own this, and all the people around him that were part of the Leave campaign all have to now own this.
Right. Sajjad Karim, 3 years on, Brexit has become this beast that seems to feed on the flesh of Tory politicians, and the leaders end up not leading anymore. David Cameron, Theresa May. What's to guarantee that Boris Johnson's going to last at all, even maybe up until October 31st?
Well, there are never any guarantees in politics, but this particular scenario is really unique in so many different ways. And Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister, really has the clock ticking away, and against him. There's no time for a honeymoon period, which normally national leaders are afforded. He's going to have to get straight at his desk and set out, as I say, in detail, the plan to get us to October the 31st and the delivery of a Brexit on an agreed basis deal with the European Union. This idea that without a deal, Britain is going to be able to leave on the 31st of October on the Prime Minister's say-so without a deal, I'm afraid, is not going to come to fruition. And what we will see at that particular point is a political crisis, but potentially a constitutional crisis, the end result of which will most likely be a general election after this government has fallen.
Yeah,
and so Boris Johnson really has a very limited amount of time available to him now.
Yeah, you say it's not going to come to fruition. He doesn't seem to agree or doesn't seem to mind. Is he just playing politics by gambling with his words, or does he actually maybe believe that?
Well, one has to deal with realities, and the reality is that the numbers in Parliament simply are not there to allow a no-deal Brexit to proceed. And whilst, of course, it is in the executive power of the Prime Minister, based upon the fact that he just has to sit back and allow midnight of October the 31st to come, and it will happen automatically, but we still have a parliamentary democracy, and our Parliament will take steps to ensure that a no-deal Brexit is averted, and if those attempts are not succeeding, then the Parliament has the power to bring the government down before that date is reached.
And Azeem, if you were advising the Labour Party today, what would you tell them to do?
Well, the Labour Party is in a very, very difficult situation. I don't think there's much that they can do. Much of it is essentially just down to Boris Johnson and trying to deliver. If he does not deliver, as your previous guest says, I suspect that there will be a general election. Boris Johnson will go to the country, and in that situation I suspect he will do a deal with Nigel Farage. He will probably give him a peerage and offer him a seat at the negotiating table to try to push through his Brexit. And in such a situation, if a general election is called, I suspect the Labour Party would probably be wiped out.
Andrew Allison, do European leaders take him seriously enough? Do they have the respect for the new Prime Minister that he probably deserves?
Well, they're going to have to start taking him seriously. I mean, as has been previously mentioned, Europe shuts down, or the EU shuts down for the whole of August, but so officially no negotiations can be done. But I would imagine that Boris will embark on some shuttle diplomacy. He's going to get around various capitals, speaks to different heads of government and heads of state, and try to get things moving. There has to be some sort of resolution to this. We voted to leave the European Union over 3 years ago. People expected it done and dusted by now. And although all the other European Union leaders do not want us to leave, they would much prefer us to stay. If we are going to go, they want it done, and they want to move onto their other projects.
Right. Sajjad Karim, Boris was, and it's worth emphasizing, miles ahead of Jeremy Hunt when it came to the voting within the party for the leadership. You had conversations with your fellow European MEPs in Brussels over the years. Undoubtedly, you would have spoken about Boris Johnson. How do they feel about him?
Well, the reality of the matter is that our European counterparts have got to deal with whoever the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is. Now, we have a new dynamic that has emerged. This is a very different personality, and personality actually does matter when it comes to the crunch, because you know, when it comes to the detailed technical analysis of what we're dealing with, well, we've completed 98% of that. The remaining 2% now is political calculations that need to be signed off on. The problem that we have got here is that the withdrawal agreement is not going to be reopened. We need to be absolutely clear about that. The written agreement which, accompanies the final text, however, there is room for manoeuvre in relation to that. But what we need here is an acceptance by the United Kingdom that Brexit has got to be a graduated process on a step-by-step approach. Otherwise, it's going to be an attempt to do it on a very abrupt basis, which will affect our economy in negative terms. It can be argued as to how negative, but it will be negative. And that is not something that the British Parliament will accept. So the reality of the situation is this: we need a deal. It needs to be accepted by the British Parliament that this is a graduated process that is going to take some time to deliver, and we've just got to work with that if we are to achieve a final Brexit point.
So, Azeem Ibrahim, Boris assembles a Brexit-oriented cabinet. He pushes for Brexit to finally materialise before October the 31st. It happens. Britain doesn't crash out of Europe before October the 31st or on October the 31st. It actually happens. And the net result of that is what? Britain becoming more divided, right?
Not at all. I believe if Boris Johnson delivers Brexit, I think what will most likely happen, and I actually believe that the most likely scenario is actually just Theresa May's previous negotiated agreement, which will be tinkered with, and it'll be passed off as a huge success of Boris Johnson. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. If I was Boris Johnson at the moment, I would be asking the new Chancellor to prepare for a no-deal Brexit of a massive package as a negotiating tactic with the EU to indicate that you're serious. If he delivers Brexit in any form, whichever it comes, the Conservative Party will be forced to come together, because Brexit, the European Union, is what has divided them for decades, and the party will then come together, and I believe it will then become a formidable political force in the UK. And I believe when Boris Johnson, the wise thing for him to do is to have a vision and an agenda already prepared for post-Brexit Britain, and then call a general election immediately, going on the euphoria of having delivered it and a vision for the country. And in such a situation, I think the Labour Party, if it's still led by Jeremy Corbyn, will be in very big trouble.
Sajjad Karim, tell me why you're shaking your head in disagreement.
It's in relation to this point that is still being made, that somehow the United Kingdom needs to convince the European Union that it is serious about a no-deal Brexit. I can tell you, the European Union is ready for a no-deal Brexit. It is a lose-lose situation on both sides for the UK and the remaining EU of 27. However, they are in a position to better able deal with the effects because they are spread out right across various parts of the economy and very many member states. So this idea that convincing them that we are willing to leave without a deal is something that is going to help the negotiations, it is not. It will have the opposite effect. And I want to remind everybody in the United Kingdom of what Michel Barnier said only a matter of days ago, that you can no-deal Brexit if you want to, but then be ready to deal with the consequences of that. Europe is ready. Are we ready? We may prepare ourselves, but it is not going to gain us any negotiating space by going to the table and threatening once again a no-deal Brexit. Europe is simply now at a point where it's saying, OK, go for it, but be ready.
Andrew, Allison, are you ready for what appear to be the ominous consequences of a no-deal Brexit?
Oh, we hear all these different horror stories. We heard them during the referendum campaign. If we have to leave trading under WTO rules, there'll probably be a bumpy time, and I'm sure that we'll get over it. But just going back to sort of the previous comments there, the EU never ever believed that Theresa May was serious about leaving without a deal. It was so obvious. She conceded just about every negotiation. She conceded ground constantly, right from the beginning. She let the EU dictate terms, and we are where we are.
But she didn't want to impoverish her country. That's why, Andrew.
Oh, well, that's such a loaded question. I'm not even going to answer it. Going back to what Azeem said, though, what I do agree with much as what he had to say. I think it'll be tinkered. The current draft treaty will be tinkered around a little bit. The EU will be seen to be giving a little bit of ground. Boris will say, well, I've had to compromise just a little bit here to get where we are. It'll be repackaged. It will be a great triumph. The country will be saying, for goodness sake, please go for it, because we're absolutely sick and tired of Brexit now. And it will get through the House of Commons, and then life will move on.
Okay, Andrew, the internet never forgets, so we're going to revisit this clip sometime soon down the line. Okay,
I'm sure
we're going to hold you to
will.
this. Okay, well, Andrew, Allison, Sajjad Karim, and Azeem Ibrahim, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.